So today I'm very excited to launch our episode 6 of the Cinchy Data Fabric Learning Series. Today we're going to be covering off of metadata-driven forms, an early preview into the human experience. Code is eating the world, and it's only a matter of time until data eats the code. And with that, let's head over to Dan.
As Joanne mentioned, this is episode 6, so episodes 1 through 5 are available on our website at either cinchy.com or directly through cinchy.tv. Would definitely encourage to take a look to get a kind of foundational knowledge around what is a data fabric and some of the concepts that we're not going to be covering today, like autonomous data and active metadata, and how to enable cross-application APIs. These are all topics from the past. So today we're going to be focusing on what we call metadata-driven forms. So let's jump right in. And as Joanne suggested, please do interrupt with any questions. What are metadata-driven forms? Well, first of all, and I'm not going to cover this in depth, we've covered this previously. If you remember the kind of evolutionary scale from being app-centric to being data-centric, on the very right, we introduced this idea of a metadata experience. So the left is kind of the 40-year-old approach of full applications. And on the right, it's where it's essentially dynamic and adaptive, not based on data, but based on metadata. So that's kind of where it fits into the spectrum of the evolution. So that's what we're going to go deep into today. And this is just that other perspective that shows kind of in practice when you have a collaborative intelligence within an organization, where does that actually fit? And you can see the metadata experience is here. That's really giving people as well as systems a common view into the enterprise brain, which is the underlying data fabric that's growing and evolving over time. So this is really one way that you can interact with that data, not just to run queries or to seed the data, but to change the data, and not even just to change the data, to be able to manage and extend and add new data, add new entities, new attributes. All of that is the metadata experience. Now, what I'll also say is when you're using a fabric, you don't have to limit yourself to the metadata experience. You can also create your own custom experiences. But again, today we're going to focus on the dynamic one. If you look at kind of the underlying architecture of the platform, really the metadata experience fits in the overall experience layer, where it's side by side with custom experiences that you would create. And regardless if it's a custom experience or the metadata experience, it's going through the universal governance, it's benefiting from plasticity, it's gaining access to the cross-application data management and query engine, and it's giving you a view into the semantic model. And of course, you're able to connect in all the data. But that's kind of where it fits. So Joanne actually alluded to this a little bit, but you've all probably heard the expression that software is eating the world, or alternatively, code is eating the world. I like to say it's the codification of the world. But there's definitely a fast follower, which is the data itself eating the code. So like our vision and what we see as the inevitable future is a world where there's actually nothing but data, but it is autonomous data. It doesn't need to exist inside of an application. So the metadata experience is really a key to enabling this future where you have nothing but data. If you think of like who's driving the car, the application, there's really three choices nowadays. There's code where the application is written in source code that gets compiled and gets deployed, and that code is powerful in terms of what it can do, but it requires a technologist to be able to change it, and it has a rigorous deployment process. And unfortunately, sometimes you can have bugs and some other factors. And if you want to change the functionality, you have to change the code, and that's not cheap or fast. The next step is the idea of turning that into data. So if you're familiar with low-code platforms and other kind of code accelerators, it's really turning that into config versus code, where it's externalizing the logic as data. So that's kind of another alternative driver. So in a low-code configuration, that would be the main kind of engine under the covers. But metadata is data about data. And in a past session, we covered the idea of active metadata. So what if the experience was driven not by data, but the metadata, the data about the data? So that's what we're going to cover today. So let me jump into the demo. And we're actually going to do a couple things. One is I'm going to show you a couple of different metadata-driven experiences, and then we're going to create a customized metadata-driven form. But before I jump into the demo, now that we've covered just some basic concepts, anyone have any questions or any thoughts on anything that we've talked about so far?
Hi, Dan, it's Alex.
Hi.
Hey, so quick question, and just in regards to metadata. So, and stop me if this is going nowhere. But in regards to metadata, is the metadata, like, where does it end? Because the data that tracks the metadata is also data, right?
Yes.
So is that metadata squared?
Yes. So the idea of really a recursive architecture kind of plays with your brain at times. So we'll get into that a little bit, but it actually doesn't end. So, and I'll show you a very specific example of that recursive nature of that, which is actually pretty cool. But it's not just cool and interesting, but it's actually very powerful. But you're absolutely right. The metadata is data, so you need the metadata about that data, and that is an infinite loop. So so great question. We'll come back to that. Any other questions before I move forward?
Just a point here, Dan. The chat does get active as well. So there's a couple of comments there. I think Carlos may have responded to the earlier question of, are you familiar with the metadata concept? And then just a comment from Raj as well. Great.
Yep. Yeah, so the idea of metadata-driven approach. So you mentioned data.world taking that. What I would say is that the idea of moving towards a metadata-driven everything is going to be we're at the early beginnings of a major shift. So I tend to agree in terms of data.world, and you're going to find that others are also kind of moving in that direction. And if they're not, they will, because it is unmatched in terms of the efficiency that you're going to gain when you have adaptive experiences. So whether you're doing metadata-driven architecture, metadata-driven development, metadata-driven forms, you're going to find that is a theme that is going to continue to accelerate. It's not going to decelerate. It's not going to go anywhere. But thank you for sharing that. Okay, so let's go in. So I'm in the platform. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start by just creating a table, so let's just jump in. So I'm going to create a new table, and I'm going to do this one from scratch. And I'm just going to say I'm going to call this metadata demo. Let's say that this is a list of people for people. So we're creating a data set to capture a list of people. So I'm going to give it an icon. I'm going to put it in a domain. I'm just going to put it in our sandbox domain. I'm going to just give it a temporary description. And I'm going to describe some attributes of this. So let's say we have first name, and I'll make that internal. And let's say we have last name, and I'll make that internal, and I'll make last name mandatory. And I'll say net worth. I'll make that a number, format that as confidential, change that into a currency, and say the current total net worth of the person. So I'm going to put a business description here, and I'm going to leave that as optional. And let's say I want to know their country of residence. And I'm going to create a link, and I'm going to point that to the countries data set, which is available inside of our fabric. Which I could separately discover through the marketplace, and I'll just link that to the name of the country, and I'll leave that as optional as well. Okay, so I'm going to keep it simple and just have these 4 fields, one of which is a link, one of which is a number, 2 of which are text. I've made just last name mandatory, and I've put some business descriptions. Let's add one more here, actually. Where does... can't spell today, and let's say that is confidential as well. Okay, so I've now saved this new table, and what I've really done is I've extended our semantic model with a new node, and that node has one link. That link is into the countries table, and let me just put a couple of rows of data in here. So let's say Bob, and if you remember, I made last name mandatory. So we've got Smith. I'll just enter some kind of random numbers here. And let's say Bob lives in Canada, and let's do Jane Jones, different numbers, and let's say in the US, and let's limit it to that. Okay, so I have my data table. And I have a couple of rows of data, and I've defined the metadata. And as you'll remember in the past session where we covered active metadata, if I go to the table columns table, which is one of the inbuilt system tables, that's part of the meta model. And if I do a filter for where the table contains, what did I call it? I called it metadata demo for people. So if I do metadata demo, should be fine if I spell metadata right. So I'm now seeing the columns that exist, of which many of them are system columns. So rows 5 through 20 are actually system columns. But here's the columns that I just created. So I created a column called first name, and I created a column called last name, and I created a column called net worth. And you can see the metadata here, like text, number, link. I can see the descriptions. I can see that this one is mandatory. And as you saw from before, if I make a data change to the metadata here, like if I go back and change this and change first name to just F name and save that, if I come back into the table columns table, first name is now called F name, and same way that I can look at the history of data changes, I can do that here, and I can see the history of change of this metadata. So Alex, to your point of kind of that recursive nature, this is this data, this metadata is data, and it's in a table called table columns. Well, this table also has a definition. Now, this is our own environment, and it's our production environment that we use to run the company. So you can see I can design controls, but I can't design this table. But if I were flipping into a mode where I was developing, say, the platform, the thing that we as a company sell, then I would go into design table, and now I'm designing the table that contains the table columns. So the fact that there's a type is actually a column, and ordinal is a column, and these are all defined in the very same way that I created this this business table called metadata demo for people. Okay, so that's the first thing. The next thing is the fact that you're seeing that I can enter data in it. I'm not just creating a structure, I can manage data in it. So inside of the metadata experience, it has a view called all data and a recycle bin. So if I were to delete a record, so Bob's gone, but Bob's actually easily recoverable because Bob's in the recycle bin, I can just go ahead and restore that. And now it's back and it's tracking that history. So I can see that it was deleted and then restored. I can see that it was changed, so on and so forth. But I can also customize the columns here. I can reorder things. I can apply sorts or filters. I can choose the kind of default column height. I can import, export, and do other things. I can also create customized views. I can do it from scratch, or maybe I want to start with the all data view, and I'm going to call this test view, and I'll make this one the default. And let's say I don't want that, and I want that there, and I want to also pull in the currency, because from the country I can get to the currency. So let me just save that. So now I've created a view called test view, and you can see it's pulling in the currency alongside the country. And I can create a second view, and I can copy it from test, and this one I won't have this, and I'll sort it a little bit differently. Let's sort it by that. So this is now my second view. There's my first view. So I can create and share these views. And this is really the tabular experience. But what we wanted to show today is the idea of, well, how do I create an alternate metadata-driven experience? So one of the app experiences that we've created, that initially we created just for our own use of the platform in us running the company, but we make that available actually for free as well, is the what we call Cinchy forms, which is a metadata-driven forms library. But it's nothing more than something that we built on top of Cinchy that you could build yourself as well. You don't even need to use this. But I'm going to quickly show you how that works. So if I do Cinchy forms, so there's three core tables that are at play here. There's the forms catalog, forms break down into sections, and sections break down into fields. So I'm just going to open these three up, and let's actually register an entirely new form. So I'm going to just go and add a new form. So this was our metadata demo for people form. So I'm just going to call this metadata form. Actually, let's do metadata demo form. So I'm giving it a name. For the display name, I'm just going to use the same value. And for the table, metadata demo for people. So there's the table that I just added. So you can see that's actually a link coming into the tables table. And for the lookup label, I'm going to say metadata demo for people. I'm going to use, let's say, the last name. So I've now created a new record in the forms table, but it's actually created a form for me. But before I use that form, I want to actually create maybe just one section to get started. So I'm going to go into the sections table and I'm going to add a new section. And the form was called metadata demo form. And I'm going to put this first. And I'm just going to say demo section. And I'm going to say display the header. And let's say that I want to have 2 columns per row. I'll limit it to that. If I now want to add some fields to that particular table, so let me just go ahead and add in a couple of the fields that I added. So for the form section, I had called it, what did I call it again? Metadata, just demo section. So demo section. So here's the basically registering a field, and I'm going to say that I want metadata demo form, and so let's pull in the country. And let's pull in the last name. I'll just start with these 2 fields. And I'm going to put that in the same section. Let's limit it to that for now. Okay. So I've now basically finished creating my first form, and I'll show you what that looks like in a second. And that form has 1 section, and that 1 section has 2 fields. So I'm going to go back into, give me 1 second here. To zoom out of the way. Okay, so the form that we have, it is, where did it go? So the form is 163. So bear with me for 1 second. Okay, so what I'm now seeing is the render of that form. So you can see that there is 1 section called demo section. And you can see that there's that section is here. And if I had multiple sections, I would see those. And I see the last name, and you can see last name is mandatory. And you can see country is a link, and it gives me the tooltip. As I navigate through the record, so there's Smith, there's Jones, and I can make changes to it, and I can save that. And notice how last name is read-only. But if I go back into that particular table, and if I change my access, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that I can view the data, but I can't edit every column anymore. So I'm removing my ability to edit the 4 columns, and I'm only going to allow me to edit, let's say, the country. So if I go into the standard tabular experience, well, you can see only the country is editable, But if I go back into that particular form, and if I just refresh this, because this is adaptive based on the metadata and control data, you can see that the last name is now read-only. It's not editable. So the form itself is dynamically adapting to the control data as well as the metadata. So last name doesn't have a tooltip. Well, if I go back into here and go into design and last name and add some type of a tooltip here and save that, then when I refresh the form, as you can imagine, it's now going to show that tooltip. So that is a combination of data. So the forms table, the form sections table, the form fields table, that's data, but the metadata is what is the data type? Is it a currency? Is it a number? Is it text? Is it multi-line? Is it single line? Is it a link? And the dynamic adaptation to that based on the actual metadata. So again, if I come back and refresh that and go to the first record, so you can see now there's a tooltip with the description that I had put in. So I can very easily create forms that allow me to interact with any data. And I'll show you just one example of that. You saw that I was kind of just hijacking a URL here. But if I go into our sales related tables, and if I just look at, I'm just going to pick one particular record and open this up in a form view. So what I'm looking at is a form that we had already previously configured using the very same mechanism that you're seeing in that demo, but this is a more fulsome form that has different sections. So here's the summary, and here's the next action, and here's any notes, and here's the exit criteria, and you can see this one actually has a child form, and I can edit individual records. So I can create a rich experience where, again, the fact that this field is read-only and this field is editable, and this field has a tooltip and this field doesn't, and this one shows as a currency, and this is a drop-down, and that's a kind of a selectable link that I can search for, and all of that is powered by metadata. So you can apply this really to any data whatsoever, to the point where, and Alex, I think this will resonate based on your question. If I go back into the forms table, where the form that I created, let me just do a filter for that. So where the name contains metadata demo. So I'm now just seeing that one record. Well, we actually went as far as to create a form for the forms table. So let me open up the form for editing the form. So now I'm designing the form without having to bounce between the tables in the tabular view that you saw me doing awkwardly earlier. But here you can see this is now the form. There's the table, there's all the fields, it has the tooltips for the descriptions. I can see the different sections. So if you remember, I added one section and I configured it to have 2 columns. If I wanted to change that and say, you know what, I want it to now be 1 column per row, I can go ahead and change that, and I can save that. And if I go back into that particular record and refresh it, so now I'm opening up the enhanced version of that, and now you can see they're overlaid on top of each other because I've changed the configuration of that particular form. So this is fully recursive to the point where if I want to even see the underlying fields in that particular section, I can go into the design of that section, and now I'm seeing a separate form where I'm seeing the fields that I've added. So you can see there's country and there's last name. So this is literally using forms to build forms. Yes, I can design the forms form, if that makes sense, which is pretty cool.
So does that work? So I think what you just showed was a form to show the changes of the form.
Yep.
If you change the forms form, does that create a third dimension of forms to track those changes?
So I can actually have different forms. So all of those changes are tracked. Like if I go back to the forms table, and instead of looking at the one I just created, let's look at I think we called it meta something. What do they call it? Let me go back. Metaform. So it's called Metaform is the name. I'll show you that one. So here's the forms form right here, row number 1. It's the form designer. So that's what you were seeing when I was editing the form. So I could have different forms for the same entity because it's just a skin, it's just an experience. And this is a metadata-driven experience. So if I look at the version history, well, let's see, when did we add this? I added this metaform on September the 14th, so about a month ago. And then I made a couple of changes, and then Cinchy, who's our product manager, went in and started to enhance it. So changed it from the forms form, because that was a little bit confusing, to calling it the metaform. And she renamed it to metaform on September 28th at 8:52. So everything that you're seeing, whether it's a field configuration in a form or data in a business table or the structure of a business table, it's all under that universal protection. So it's all restorable, it's all auditable, it's all formable. It's all kind of everything. Does that make sense?
I think so. I'm trying to think about it, but can you change this metadata? Like, is it like, what's the security? Can you go in? Like, I'm just thinking in regards to like, if someone came in and like broke the system, can you kind of go into the forms form, start changing things, and then things will stop working?
So the forms data set is a table that has the same protections. So I can control who has access to make changes. So as an example, you can see for us, we've enabled everyone in the company to be able to edit forms, because there's an element of trust knowing that we can restore anything back. But if I didn't want to do that, like I could in one click make it so now not everyone can edit all the forms. So that's it. Now they've lost the editability, but they can still see the data, but that takes effect immediately. Let me just restore that back, because I want them to be able to do that, because building forms isn't a sensitive issue because it doesn't touch the business data. It's just the experience. But if I wanted to, I could segregate people into teams. I could give you the ability to administer kind of groups for individual forms. So anyone can create a form, but then you can restrict access to the design of that form. So that's not a forms feature. That's just using the platform's universal capability of protecting access to data down to the data cell level. So as you're kind of designing your organization, you're going to, we're going to cover this in actually our next session, which is how to right size the controls and establish data ownership, because that's really where you're getting into. And it's a really good question. And it does require you to, instead of kind of designing the architecture, you have to design the access, which is a trade-off that I think is well worth it, because what you're now gaining is universal protection for the controls that you configure. So hold that thought till next week. But the short answer is, as long as you manage the controls and permissions in the way that you ultimately want to design your business, then the answer is no. It will be universally enforced and protected.
Yeah, and there's a couple of questions in the chat as well.
Sure. Yep. Thank you. It doesn't pop up for me. Okay, so different tools to develop user experiences. Yes, so you can absolutely, this is just an example of us using our own platform to build an experience, but you can build your own experiences. You could do AR, VR, native iOS, Android, you could do Angular, you could do HTML5. And we are going to cover that in a future episode where we're talking about custom application experiences. But the short answer is you can build it in anything that you want, and you wire it up to Cinchy through the API layer, which is dynamic. And you saw a preview of that in our last session when we were talking about the cross-application APIs without writing any code. So you can create your own front end, and that front end can optionally be deployed inside of the Cinchy experience. You do not have to do that though. But like if I go back to home, see how there's a filter here for experiences. Well, if I filter that, like we've built our own org chart renderer, even the data network that visualizes with all the spinny dots, that's actually a custom experience that we built in just plain old HTML. That actually we had a co-op student initially build that, and we liked it so much that we included it with the solution. That's the one that renders the whole fabric. That's just a custom experience, and we've chosen to make that available as an icon, as an experience inside of it, but it can also be accessed outside of this container. So the code that renders it is non-proprietary. There's no coupling to Cinchy whatsoever. It's through the REST layer. And the forms are publishable on the web, absolutely. I can pop this out and have it be even outside of the header. So let's say I had an existing customer-facing portal and I wanted to have a form that's embeddable in that. I could do that as well, where I'm getting the benefits of kind of simplification of the forms creation. Good questions. Any other questions? Okay, so I realize we're a bit over, so apologies for that. Hoping that was helpful. And again, next week we're going to be covering controls and how to just right size ownership. And Joanne, is there anything else that we want to add before we close?
I think that's about it. I have posted the link directly in the chat, so you can sign up right now. For anyone that attended last week, just a small point, we had a different episode 7 that we were going to cover off. So if you signed up for that, it's now going to be our episode 9. We just, after looking at people's questions and thoughts, we decided that it was really important that we stop right now and cover universal control. So thanks, Alex. You can understand why we stopped and made that vector or that change in our approach. And we really look forward to having you all join next week. And this session will be available on demand for all of you to share it in your networks. Thanks very much, Dan.
All right. Thank you, everyone.